No worries. We're not going to just leave everything in. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think my audience would care, but it'd
Yes,
still be fine. But they're pretty chill about it. How are you today?
I'm fine.
Feeling
So I
good?
call you angst. Is that how you like to pronounce it?
Angst. But
Angst.
angst is fine. Anger and frustration is what I'm about. So at least
Oh,
at least
that's
that's the joke, because it refers to the existential aspects of it.
yes.
Anger and frustration. So let's just get right into it. Birb, go right ahead.
Hi, Burp.
Oh,
Hi.
say hi, Birb. There you go. Say hi,
Hello.
Birb. Let's do the thing where people introduce each other.
Hi,
Right.
birb.
Yeah, there we go.
Make some make believe.
Yeah. Schizoids and introducing each other is not quite like a thing a lot of the time. Okay, so go right ahead, Birb.
Okay, question 1. What are the surface characteristics of schizoid personality disorder?
Very little. That's the big surprise with my clients, that most of them, I would have never guessed had schizoid disorder adaptations. I'll go back and forth between the common term personality disorder and my preferred adaptations. That because if people look it up, they're going to have to look it up under disorder. So my experience is that most of my clients are look just like everybody else. They haven't done anything unusual. I mean, sometimes they have, tattooing and things, but for the most part, it's when they reveal themselves to me with their issues, or when I pay attention in the old days when people didn't have a diagnosis so much and I noticed things. But one of my clients who's also in the field of mental health, I asked her, what should I tell people? What do they need to know? Because she's profoundly schizoid, but very, very functional. And you wouldn't guess. I wouldn't guess it. So I don't know if
nobody ever guesses when they know that about me.
Yeah.
Like when they find out, they're like, really? I'm like, yeah.
So what she asked, I said, I ask people, what do you want the general public to know to represent something you're struggling with? And she said, let them know that they'll never know what's inside me from what they're seeing outside of me on my surface. And so that was where I pretty much start. People tend to either, unless they're quite more on the schizotypal end, of things, or they've embraced being a zoid, for example, or something. Yes. There's some obvious signaling of something going on. For the most part, 99% of the time, there's no obvious signaling.
Just to talk about that a little bit, it's that like especially when you're talking covert, right? In a lot of ways, there's the highly functional type, which are usually the covert ones, like myself. And I'm a salesman, like my regular job, right? Which is hilarious. Like I have to pump up the charisma. I have to do all these things that are kind of not my nature. But it's for practical reasons. It's for pragmatic reasons. But this is what I want to ask in regard to that. Are there any visible characteristics when the person does open up?
It depends on the degree. Most of the people that I see, I'm calling it my people, but my clients or
of course,
friends, the visible, it's not so much visible. If you show
behavioral,
if you show me a guy over 30 who is very involved with existential philosophy still, post-college, post-graduate school, when a lot of people are reading that kinds of things. And he tells me that his master's degree is in philosophy. He loves the existential philosophers. Love might be the wrong word that would be used. And
I get highly interested.
Highly interested. And, as soon as I play a game with myself with all the diagnoses. Let's find easier ways. What are things that odds are on belong in this diagnostic group, even though I'm not doing a full diagnosis? So like with a guy who I'm diagnosing, and I see somebody and he's not saying anything, but I'll go for narcissism, for example. I see a guy who's not in the fashion business and heterosexual, who is wearing 2 pieces of hard to iron or take care of luxury clothing. and he's heterosexual, like a linen shirt and soft suede loafers, I begin to think narcissistic shoes, narcissistic linen. So I'm playing a little game like that on the time. And so what happens is there isn't that type of signaling going on visibly for me.
Okay. So you're saying for schizoids, there's not really a lot of visible signals.
It's what they ask me for. For example, here's how I used to tell before the internet. The only people who found me without a referral, because I was kind of hard to find, and if anyone looks at my website, they're going to see that it looks like the website of somebody who a 6-year-old did it, and they did it badly.
Hey.
A 6-year-old didn't have access to a very good computer. So it wasn't so easy to find me. The only people that found me without a referral and had the correct diagnosis told me they had schizoid personality disorder. And that was very interesting. So someone came to me self-diagnosed as schizoid. The odds were very high they were correct. That almost never happened. They almost never got the diagnosis wrong, and they found me, whereas everybody else got their diagnosis wrong.
That's actually, it's interesting though, because that's not the first time I hear that. I hear that amongst people in the server community type thing I run, because like they'll tell me like, oh, a lot of the times they don't really go and then get diagnosed with it, like not knowing, oh, what's wrong. It's more like they kind of have a high suspicion and they've done some reading, and then they show up, and then they might not necessarily tell the psychologist, but they'll tell them all the symptoms and all the issues they're dealing with. And then when the psychologist is like, oh, you're schizoid, they're like, okay, this makes sense. Like, okay.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
And so I listen to what people tell me where they decide to sit. And when I had an office, I could tell by their reaction. Again, these are not full diagnoses, but it's like just to play with it. I see enough people who used to enter my old office, and it had multiple seating options. And chances are there were a few people that I automatically thought were schizoid. And sometimes my body knew it before I knew it.
We have an aura about us, or?
No, it'd be like this. If I'm so used to having countertransference to different groups and paying attention to it. And so if my countertransference is to tell somebody walks in and I tell them, I'm going to be sitting here. Why don't you choose a chair that you like where you'd like to sit? Okay. Mm-hmm. So if I'm making a big deal about being predictable with this person and giving them choices, later on, it's very automatic with me. Mm-hmm. I don't make this, I'll give everybody choices, but not in the same way of reassuring, where am I going to be sitting? Where am I in relation to the door? Which I'm going to show them.
I know.
And things like that. And I'm giving them a little more instruction intuitively that they have choices. Then I start to think, oh.
Okay, sorry about that. Somebody walked into frame and I'm like, no way, I had explained. I'm recording. In any case.
You see what I'm saying? So for me, it's usually less a visual thing than a visceral response. Like, I don't care what somebody tells me if I'm working with somebody, and so lots of times people come and they have a diagnosis that they believe in. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe in that diagnosis.
Yeah.
And if they're lower functioning, and I don't mean this in any pejorative way.
No, of course.
In their defense system, the last defense that people use is pretty much is projective identification. I don't know if you guys know what that is. It's a
mutual. Probably knows the phrase better than I do.
Okay, so I'll explain it. But if I find myself in a state where I can identify it as projective identification, I would put money on it that the other person is profoundly schizoid, not just a little schizoid, but way beyond, because I lose my boundaries, they lose their boundaries. And like I said, it's a two-person, nobody knows how this works, but there's books written on it. Thomas Ogden wrote a lovely book on projective identification. And because I didn't know what was going on in the beginning, and I needed some explanation, and I researched it, is the projection, somebody is playing in their head a two-person show, and one of the roles gets projected onto me. And to the extent that I identify with the role or have an aspect of me that identifies with it, I might not notice it. But to the extent that what's being projected makes me uncomfortable and feel self-doubt. I'll give you some examples. Like one person before I was trained in their first session, said he had issues with trust. And I started wondering, am I trustworthy? Will he be safe with me? Well, this was early on. And I said, well, that's not a typical thought for me. Where is that coming from? So that would be projective identification light. I'm resonating with the projection, and the reason I can recognize it is it's not one of my issues normally. A couple of times people projected very sadistic things on me. That was socially, that wasn't a client even. And I had to leave quickly because I unexpectedly, I don't want to feel that towards them. I don't want to hurt them. And it's boundaries. So, but in session, what I told one person it felt like we were both in a soup together. And there were meatballs of emotion floating around in the soup. Mm-hmm. And when a meatball would come by me, and I didn't know if it had its origin in him or it's had its origin in me. And it's a very funny feeling.
Of all things.
Yeah.
Meatballs of all things. Birb, could you provide us that second question so we can kind of...
Yes,
thank you.
What kinds of environmental factors do you believe are causal in developing schizoid personality disorder?
Okay, well, I think first of all, there's a combination of factors. And for all personality disorders, there's a predisposition of sensitivity, empathy, and the ability to be reached by the kid. And then there's a bad attunement by the parents, and inadequate attunement. And it can range. My clients range from really incredibly terrible and malicious parents to just clueless, one being the father being a workaholic narcissist, and the mother being a devaluing woman who happened to be borderline, but didn't want the responsibilities of having a child. And he was told he was too much trouble, and they just lied to him from the beginning.
Wow.
It was continuous. Then my clients who had the doors taken off their bedrooms so that they couldn't masturbate.
That's healthy, giving a child no privacy whatsoever ever in their entire life. But so I want to elaborate a little bit on that. You said that there's a lack of attunement between the child and the parent, right? And a parent's inability to sort of adapt to their child or adapt to their child's needs, or is it just merely a parent that's, like you described, narcissistic or disconnected themselves? Can you have two parents that say aren't necessarily those things, but aren't quite attuned with the child's needs, and thus some adaptations can form? With no malicious intent from the parents, or no malevolence or anything like that.
I hear stories like that. But there's plenty of Clueless, but a lot of the people that I see, fear and abuse, intrusiveness. I tell some of the stories. Like one man, we were talking in therapy, and he kept putting off. He was a good-looking guy, and he wanted to date women, but he was very afraid. Yeah. And he made the excuse that he needed to lose 10 or 15 pounds so that he would have this. I don't know if you.
I actually heard the story too on Anna's thing when you did.
Okay, so he talked about, he was pretty isolated, and he talked about this blanket that he was very fond of from childhood. And I was still pretty clueless. I hadn't studied yet schizoid personality disorder. I hadn't studied with Masterson yet. I went by gut instinct and Gestalt therapy and whatever I knew. And most of the time it was okay. And So he talked about this blanket with great affection. He had very little in his life. And I said, where is the blanket? Did you save it? And he said, it's in my parents' home. It's up on a shelf in the closet. And I said, well, if you like it so much and it's so comforting, why don't you go get it? He looked extraordinarily stricken, like I had just taken away some kid's blankie and the popsicle out of his mouth. I mean, he just looked like horrible. So I said, what's the matter with that? What happened? And he said, if they knew I wanted it, they would throw it away.
You mentioned cluelessness, right? With parents. I've discussed this with a lot of schizoids and stuff, and they've kind of undergone some of this. Like in my case, I did too. Like there's parents, oddly, that say they think they're doing the right thing for their child, or they think this is what is good for them. And their intent is not necessarily a malignant one, but nonetheless causes this sort of disconnection or sort of damage. Well, here's a good example, I guess. It would be like a child that isn't interested in something that the parent thinks is good for them. And then they force them to take part in it because they think it's for the child's good. And that kind of creates a further disconnect and not resentment necessarily, but a feelings of neglect and your opinion and your thoughts and your feelings essentially being null and void because you are displaying a disinterest or a inability to enjoy whatever it is that the parent is saying is a normal thing for a child to enjoy. Does that make sense?
It does. And kids can substitute a very rich fantasy life for that.
Mm-hmm.
If I look at myself at different stages when I was younger, I watched myself cycle through what could have been a schizoid personality disorder. And then my mother changed husbands a lot. Too much for me. And, I would cycle through. I thought I was going to end up a narcissist from how I was born in around 3. And I didn't know the terms for those, but I knew what I was thinking and doing. So I went through a heavy fantasy period where I had elaborate fantasies and I read a lot and things like that. And so people retreat into what is available. But essentially, the period when I had the heavy fantasy period, my stepfather was it was like a master-slave relationship. Mm-hmm. Ralph Klein calls this typical schizoid relationship a master-slave relationship, where you feel like there's no negotiation possible. You have to do what you're told to do. And it doesn't really matter whether they think it's for your good. It's better if they have good intentions because you feel at least that they care about you than if they have bad intentions. But in the end, at that period of my life, that was all I could substitute. I lived in books and with very atypical interests. My hobby as a kid was lepers, was one of my hobbies. And lepers, Jim Bowie, the Bowie knife, and a few other things that people were not. Before people were interested in vampires, I was a precocious child. I read everything I could find on, I was an expert on.
I think there's a lot of the zoids on.
We're
very, very much. A lot of us are very much readers of specific special interests or watchers. I mean, and you described an internal fantasy, but what's interesting is the schizoid is often described as an individual that doesn't just have like an internal fantasy; they have an internal world. And I've always been curious about that because when I bring up, say, the idea of having an internal world, it's often conflated with just having literally like either a complete, like actual kind of world that they live within. And in some cases, that's the case, that they actually retreat to. And then in other cases, they almost project that inner world onto the external in order to make it more manageable. Birb, could you drop that third question for us?
Okay.
Yeah.
Which strategies have you found most effective for treating schizoid personality disorder?
There isn't one. I follow Ralph Klein, who was the director of training of the Masterson Institute when Masterson was still alive, and he's a brilliant guy. And he wrote the best chapters on schizoid personality disorder. I forgot your question. I'm so busy answering this history with where they can find the information in disorders of the self. But okay, on the treatment, he had suggestions for treatment that he thought were very important, and you could do what you wanted, but within a framework. So what I have found, he had suggested that you could say almost anything that you liked, really, to somebody who had a schizoid. He didn't use the word adaptation, but that's how I think of it. As long as you label it clearly as your own thinking and you give them a choice. You're not telling the person what they think or feel or what they should do.
Really important.
So I'm going to do it in an exaggerated way here. Angst, is that
Let's
okay?
do it. Yeah, let's go for it.
So just to exaggerate it is, I was thinking about our last session, and I had a thought about it. I thought it might possibly be useful to you. Have you any interest in hearing it?
I would generally, I myself would respond, yes. Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Well, my idea was, and then ABC, and I was wondering what you would think of it. So I'm being very careful. I'm keeping everything. If there's a net between us, and some of my clients have an invisible net, they don't call it a net, they call it other things. So I'm staying on my side of the net. These thoughts, these ideas are on my side of the net. I'm offering them on my side of the net, and you can reach across if you like and take one or two or not.
If they choose to not, how do you handle that?
Fine.
Like say that I would have answered, no, not really.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, tell me what interests you to talk about today. Give me a little orientation, if you would, of what you would like or what you how you prefer to approach today's session.
That would work, say for a schizoid sort of person like myself, but I've come across individuals that also wouldn't want the pressure of being asked something about themselves or their interests. They can't describe it in words a lot of the time. It'll just be like, oh, what are you interested in? And they might respond with, I don't know, lots of things. I'm not sure what in particular, or so on. And it gets very aloof,
Well, it depends on the person. I do a relational therapy, and I relate to who's ever in front of me, and I try and meet them at a level. Now, there's some people where there's too big a gap between me and them, and I have no idea how to respond. That's the truth. So one of my teachers said something very comforting to me when I was training in Gestalt therapy, Isidor Fromm, and I came to him with something that I didn't understand that the client wanted me to do. They wanted me to study chloroenergetics, and I didn't know what my obligations as a therapist was.
Oh, they're like, you need to study this esoteric topic in order for me to talk to you. No, exactly. Yeah, that is actually pretty zoidy. Like,
okay, like, so I went to him and I said, Isidore, I'm not sure what to do. It's
a very unique situation.
So he said, he looked at me and he said, he used to smoke and he was very messy and the ashes were everywhere and he looked like a tiny chihuahua of a human being. And he said, Elinor, you're a boutique, not a department store. So that freed me. But the point was, there's only, each therapist has a range. It's like a singer with a range. And we can play and sing within our range. If someone's too far outside, what an example of outside my range. My first year of doing therapy, I had a guy come to me dressed in a suit, stockbroker for a living. In the initial inquiry about the session, and I'm really a young new therapist, he's very straightforward, said he wanted therapy, ... Then he comes in, and after the beginning of the session, he refuses to talk to me, and he looks angry, and he's looking at the ceiling, not me, and he's blowing out air periodically. And I had no idea what to do with him. And I tried to engage him and ask him questions or whatever. Nothing worked. Second session like that, nothing worked. I eventually stopped with him because I didn't.
So not a word, just ceiling staring and puffing?
Puffing, and once a resentful word, but nothing that would illuminate anything.
And this was like without at any point actually starting.
Without any point starting, all I knew was he lived what that could have been cues, if I was more sophisticated, I knew they weren't good signs, but I didn't know what they meant, is he lived in his mother's basement.
Okay.
And someone since pointed out, when I was mimicking what he did, that his looking up was looking up to her floor above him, perhaps. And I could intuit that this had to do something to do with his relationship with his mother. He picked a female therapist who he then refused to talk to. So, but I never did find out. It's too outside my range.
No, I especially at the time, like you said, it wasn't like it might not be outside your range at this point. Maybe
it might not.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the case of my own psychologist, they did many of the things you talked about already, which is, and I don't know if that they knew to do that, but they kind of adapted to it because they're not a specialist on the subject or anything. And she would basically like say all the stuff ahead of time, like, this is just my thought, this isn't necessarily correct. Like some of the stuff you're just mentioning in general are some of the reasons why my personal therapy was actually effective. I would spend a 40-minute session not even discussing myself, right, just discussing some esoteric topic, and she was savvy enough to listen to the topic and determine things about me via my interest in the topic. And I was actually going to ask you, have you come across situations where you have like a schizoid individual or adaptive person or whatever you want to call it, and all they want to do is talk their subject matter or their special interest for the entire session, and you're able to kind of find nuggets of like them in all that?
I can. I'm pretty good at analytic thinking and picking up metaphors. However, it would depend on, I'm going to be 77 in January. So I had much more patience because that was going to be a long therapy. And to most of the people, by the time they get to me, they're more willing to talk to me, but I'm more flexible. I was even more flexible when I was younger. One of my Zoid clients told me he wanted me to get, I didn't have any training. I wanted to refer him out when he came to me. And he said, will you read if I give you books? And I said,
if
yes,
I give you the books, that's amazing. Oh, it's such a Zoid thing. Like, if I share with you the knowledge necessary to help me, will you read it? And if it's funny too, because if you were to say yes, then they would. And if you were to say no, they'd move on. And then that would be that.
And sometimes, it wasn't exactly like you talking about a particular topic, though, of course, I would be interested. Sometimes a book, we need an object between us to talk about. So one person came to me and they knew Theodore Milan, and he had input into the DSM, which I do not like at all, especially what they say about schizoid personality disorder. But in any case, she said, certain parts of this relate to me and certain parts don't, from his book. And so I said, why don't you bring the book and read the parts you think will relate? Because we were very far apart, and so that we were capable of doing. And I said, listen, that's a very heavy book. How about if I buy a copy for myself, and then you can note it, and then there'll be a copy here. And you can tell me what parts I should read that you feel describe yourself. So in a way, we're doing what you're talking about. It's indirect. It's talking. She gets to talk about herself in this indirect way by pointing to areas for me to read, and it became, a way of interacting.
I see that sort of interaction amongst Zoids in the community. They establish, I guess, what would be normally termed like a camaraderie via mediums of media. And via those exchanges of interest and discussion on the interests, they would essentially discover things about one another without ever being completely direct. But the value they were getting out of it was profound in comparison to, say, maybe the value a regular person or whatever, for lack of a better term right now, would be getting out of such an exchange. They seem to be getting more of a almost I don't want to say intimate value, like a interpersonal value from an exchanging of media, whether it's literature, whether it's knowledge, data of some kind, videos, whatever. It's not so much just because they have this mutual interest, because they were able to discuss it and they were able to communicate these interests in a way in which the individual didn't really have to mask, or they didn't have to like worry about having to explain certain things, or worry about the social cues, or certain aspects of interaction that are uncomfortable for a lot of schizoids were not available. They weren't there. And so it's like, oh, okay, we can just talk about this. And I don't have to worry about all these other things that usually come with developing an interpersonal relationship with a person. So, and oddly enough, that's actually what helps them flourish, an interpersonal relationship, which is, I know it's like contradictory, but it's really, really interesting. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I have some more answers to Burb's
question. Oh, no, go for it. I ramble. That's what I do.
I want to take a 2-minute break, if that's okay now.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll just be right back.
No, do your thing.
Okay, just to check before I go into whatever I go into, is this meeting your needs? Is this what you guys like or want?
Yeah, this is fine, Birb. You good?
Super
good. Yeah, this is great. Yeah. This is great stuff.
Good. So I'm okay with being interrupted. I'm okay with being redirected.
I'm okay with interrupting you, so no problem.
Okay. Are you okay?
I'm okay with interrupting anyone. So that it's actually something I work on, which is not interrupting people. And it's not because like I want, like, oh, my voice is so important, I want to be heard over others. It's just like my thoughts are coming. I want to say them. So that's a whole different thing. Yeah.
And I'm a New Yorker. We interrupt to show enthusiasm, but the rest of the country is much more polite.
I know, it's actually impolite to not interrupt, right? Probably as a New Yorker.
I have the urge to interrupt right now.
Oh, why? Why do you have the urge to interrupt?
Oh, I'm just curious about what her additional answers were to the question.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, Birb wants to get to the meat of it.
The meat of this.
Let's go. All right, begin.
So when you grow up in a master-slave relationship, however benevolent the mastery is and well-intended, or however worse it is, what you don't learn is negotiation, how to negotiate differences. So most of my clients, they can be in a relationship and they can be out of the relationship, but they need a boat if they're going to be in a relationship, because it's on some level a master-slave relationship from their point of view. They might not capture it in those words. They need a way to escape the relationship. Like the person has to be geographically unavailable. They don't know how, because it's very difficult for them to just talk about their needs and expect the other person to care. So most of them build these partial relationships that have some rules to them that allow them to, like the other person's married, so they're not going to leave their husband or their wife, or they only see the person a few times a year because they live in another country.
Got it.
And so all of this stuff is an attempt to do what simple negotiation would make much easier. So I let people know when I'm seeing them that negotiation is possible. I can change, I can down-regulate, I can up-regulate. There are choices here. And it's done when I had a physical office. I've sold the building that I had that office in. It was fabulous. I had lots of space. So it was really easy to do interventions that didn't look like interventions, but really they mattered to people, like giving them choices. All my lights were on dimmer. The air conditioner could be turned up or down. The lights could be turned up or down. The shades went up and down. There were multiple seating options. So right away.
Birb likes that a lot, all that, Birb. All those options. Those are good options. That's like ideal.
So I would also I was taught to be very predictable by Ralph Klein, that the people wanted to be able to position themselves relative to me in the door. You know, the two things that were super important were the exit and where I was going to be, and me being predictable.
And it's funny too, because like I've met people that literally, they do not like the exit in any way, shape, or form being blocked out of a room, or they don't even like doors shut behind them. They don't like not having it out. Like, and even myself, I deal with issues of agoraphobia that are only associated with this idea of not having an out or an exit of a situation. And that's interesting that you mentioned that, because it kind of resonates with me quite a bit. But go ahead, sorry.
Good. That means I'm on the right track, and Ralph is on the right track. And so a lot of the interventions are less that like there's a type of therapy. There were certain principles that he made me aware of that were important, and that would, so right from the beginning, I would give choices. I'm going to be predictability and choices. I'm sitting here, there's a washroom over there. You can use it whenever you like. You don't have to wait. If you're, make yourself comfortable. How do you, sit where you like? Pillows are movable, chairs are movable. Maybe with fewer words than that.
You're like, I'm movable. I'm like, I'm movable. Like, they're like, I want you to flip your chair around and face that way. I'm wondering.
I've gotten very interesting.
No eye contact.
Well, speaking about eye contact, I had a fellow who was a medical doctor, and he was my only histrionic zoid. And I don't know if you know any histrionic zoids. I knew it was possible, thank God.
Maybe, I don't know.
And what do I mean by histrionic? Usually the people that I see were either superficially friendly and looking like everyone else, or they were somewhat removed and introverted seeming a bit, okay? Or you got the non-talkers, who there would be long silences and things like this. And this guy was very extroverted, very whatever. But I had the feeling, and the histrionic pieces, he would talk about, he would get too close to someone, he would swallow them up, and he would do it with hand movements and then he would get nauseous inside, and he'd be making body movements, and then he would mimic throwing up. Then I have to get them out of me immediately. I can't stand it for another second. So he's mimicking throwing up. But meanwhile, I get the sense I am not allowed to look at him directly. He hasn't said that, but I decide, not while he's going through the whole thing, but on another time when things were quiet, that my room was 19 and a half by 19 and a half feet. He was at one end, I'm at the other almost, catty corner. And he had chosen a chair pretty far back. Like we could have done a whole group therapy with the other chairs in the room. And I know somewhere deep inside me that I'm not supposed to look at him. But I decide to test it, because at that point I still haven't studied the topic. It's just, I'm going on gut feelings. And so I look up and I look into his eyes, and he becomes furious with me. He says, so I want it to be expressed in words, because I'm trying to check out my own understanding at that point. I hadn't attended any lectures, but I have a pretty good, I know at some level before I know consciously. Mm-hmm. So I knew this at some deep level, but I want to check it out consciously, that I'm not just making it up. So I looked at him and I said, then when he got furious, and I said to him, I looked away and I said, why are you so angry with me? And he says, you know very well why I'm angry with you. And he was right. I did know why he was angry. He said, you look, so I said, I need to hear you put it into words. I need to check out my understanding, because we haven't really discussed this. He says, you looked past the center of the room. That was the line.
Interesting. It's not even you looked at me. It's you looked past the center of it, not even an acknowledgement or a willingness to discuss the fact that you looked at them. That is very, as we like to say, that's incredibly zoidy. Like, it's so funny to hear, because I do stuff like that all the time. I hear other people on the server do stuff like that. Like they'll kind of circumvent the self in order to explain it in either metaphor or in a different capacity or in a more abstract capacity, right? And this last question is a doozy, right? It's a bigger one. So that's why I want enough time to discuss it and stuff. And this kind of idea of abstraction is important to it, because there's a lot of things that are mentioned, for example, in the DSM, even if like, which ones you agree with or disagree with. And one of the terms that's often used, especially if you took it like, how do you pronounce Axtar's profile of the schizoid, but and things like that, is this idea of idiosyncratic thinking, odd beliefs, odd sort of behavioral thing, like just thoughts on matters, and this interest, like you've described, with existential philosophy, and this almost kind of preoccupation with what is often, like, I guess on the internet you would term the meta. So the most abstract possible version of a concept is what they become really focused on, really adamant about, and emotionally connected to, whether they can express that in with language or not. Like if like, I mean, just to give you an example, like I could go through a very deep depressive state, or my anhedonia and things like that could kick off pretty badly over a really abstract sort of meta concern about the world. Meanwhile, if something locally happens to me that would probably send someone, a regular person, into a similar depression, it just bounces right off me. Like, oh no, somebody said they hate me. Okay. Oh no, I saw something on the news that reminded me of this like concept or idea that disgusts me or makes me uncomfortable or makes me so sad about the world. That would just ruin my day. Right. And it looked like, and so this is kind of an ongoing theme I've discussed with a lot of schizoids, that we have like always this very uncommon sort of thinking about our environments and our experiences a lot of the time. And the reason I say it's uncommon is because that's part of what seems to be the issue, is when we try to express these uncommon this idiosyncratic thinking, as it likes to be worded, even early in life, it oftentimes is met with conflict or rejection or neglect from either parent figures or peers and things of that nature. And it kind of reinforces further these adaptations that we've been talking about, describing. So with that, just kind of me spieling that a little bit, Birb, could you read that last question, and then I'll unpack whatever needs to be unpacked, and we'll just get into it, like whatever.
Okay. What is your opinion on the application of the neurodiversity paradigm to cluster A, i.e., that a predisposition to zoomed out abstract thought may be shared across the cluster? Are schizoids predisposed to fly away from the concrete world? Could the metaphorical, artistic narrative schizoids employ to convey their existential feelings culminate in neglect or intrusion, as neurotypical caregivers fail to understand their children or attempt to fix what isn't broken? Can we alter environments and expectations to support schizoid intimacy so that abstraction surfing hermits can exchange the most crucial elements of affection and co-regulate between periods of introversion? Can potential partners learn to view schizoid willingness to be present and to engage in simple acts of kindness, holding hands or embracing, as sufficient signals of interpersonal value commensurate with the incredible effort behind them? Would wider understanding and acceptance of schizoid neurodiversity encourage individuals to communicate by reducing the fear of being compelled to pretend, to mask, to modify their language in ways which feel empty? Or is the schizoid difference merely a barrier of learned intimacy aversion, which must be dissolved at the individual level to allow for connection? Learned adaptations, healthy difference, or adaptations to cultures which reject difference? A quote from Amy, a member of the Zoid Void support group: Schopenhauer and Freud used the porcupine dilemma, in which two porcupines desire closeness, intimacy, and warmth, but find their spines to be uncomfortable in close proximity. I think Guntrip suggested that this doesn't mean closeness is impossible, but rather that it can take some effort to find the optimal distance for schizoids, end quote.
Okay, you don't actually have to unpack it for me.
Perfect. Even easier job for me. Thank you.
Yeah, unless I'm off track to what you want.
Oh, I'll interrupt if you are.
I really believe that there's a number of things that are all being lumped under the same diagnoses, and that really they deserve different diagnoses. I've seen people where they had, I believe, a predisposition since birth towards being very vulnerable to whatever people whatever happens, that you end up with a zoid adaptation to it. But I think that at that end of it, there's something genetic going on. But there's something genetic going on in a lot of stuff. Like in my mother's family, that side had very high neuroticism. Almost everybody had something. And they were also highly functional, and they could go about their business in life, which is what got me my interest in these things, without stopping functioning. They had lots of workarounds, and they were nice people, and I liked them. But there was a genetic component, and on my father's side, there was a genetic component towards psychopathy, one male a generation, kind of opposite of my mother's. So I think that sometimes you have this kind of nervous system difference, but not so often as people were saying. I don't think it's an either or, that all zoids are not neurotypical. I see lots of people with neurotypical who didn't have a typical upbringing, and they had sufficient empathy and sensitivity that they couldn't become narcissists with that upbringing. Somebody else might have become a narcissist, and they became very, very schizoid. So, and then I see people where really the degree of difficulty of their upbringing does not explain the difficulty they're having in life. That somebody with a somewhat different nervous system would be, fine with it. Not fine, they'd be in therapy, they'd have all these kind of issues, but they wouldn't be profoundly affected the way some of my clients are. So there's some group of people where I really think that there's something going on that I don't understand, that's probably genetic, temperamental, that's interacting with the environment, and that's making things much harder and worse for them, and they're not neurotypical. In that sense, in the same way that my dad, the psychopath, wasn't neurotypical. And I think that all the neuroses at best on my mother's end was, not so typical either, because I just saw it in cousin after cousin and friend after friend, relative after relative. Yeah. And then I have these people who respond very well in therapy, and they, it's a long therapy, but it doesn't have this. Again, I'm going by feeling. It feels different to me. The degree of impairment feels different. The response to it, for some kids, they can take quite a lot of difficulty, and they're like that Energizer bunny or the watch that keeps on ticking. Mm-hmm. And then there's other kids who are being misattuned, and so then we're talking about people growing up. So some of these statements about adapting and leaving room, it's already a fait accompli. The person has a zoid adaptation, whether they were born with a propensity for it that made it a certainty almost, or whether it's something that happened to them. And then it becomes, well, they've adapted by doing A, B, and C in life. Can the world also adapt to their adaptations?
Yeah, exactly. And no, it's just interesting because the reason that we brought up this question, and it's funny too, because initially prior to setting up this interview and all that stuff, we were going kind of back and forth whether this is something that we should bring up or discuss, and I'm glad we did now, especially since I discovered quite a bit with the community I've been trying to build. I have few hundred zoids in it. People watch it. Some are in that Discord or that kind of online community. Some like to just share their thoughts or even just watch. A lot of them are lurkers, is what the internet term is. It's like they just lurk. Like they'll join my server and they just read everything. They don't say anything. They don't interact with anyone. Sometimes they'll go a few weeks without doing anything like that. And then maybe they'll drop a line and then disappear again, or they'll leave the server and because I created literally kind of what you were describing, the whole optional stuff is what I'm trying to create with the server. So a lot of stuff right now is set up to where you can opt in, opt out. You don't want to see this. You don't want to see that. Okay. You don't have to see this. You don't have to see that. You want to leave and then come back. That's okay. You can leave. And when you come back, we're not going to ask any questions because we already know you were here. And we already know you got vetted, because that's how we vet people through, based on their long description and and so on and so forth, the best we can, obviously, but we take the process very seriously because we're trying to create an environment that's is friendly to the schizoid person. But what's interesting is because of this environment, there tends to be, over time, for some of them, a decrease in what is considered to be a lot of the negative symptoms associated with being schizoid, right? And when some of those symptoms regress a little bit, and some of their personality and aspects of themselves, they start discovering how to actually externally express this stuff. They what never goes away, or what seems to almost not be a part of the personality disorder or the adaptations, if you will, is the form of abstract thinking that I keep consistently seeing in the people that I've interacted with, like without fail, for the most part. In this whole year, I've been kind of doing this, and it seems to be that it's this not preoccupation, because it's not even a conscious effort. It seems as though the schizoid or the schizotypal kind of person, the idiosyncratic thinker, is that's described in cluster A across the board, is defaulted to sort of thinking about a lot of things in their life on this kind of very abstract scale. And so oftentimes a lot of the incongruency between how your value system and how you experience things and the world around you and the framework in which it's built, which is neurotypical and very middle, I guess, I can't think of a middle abstraction, sort of like concerns like status and normal human behavior stuff like status, resource management, what is it, like a certain types of intimacy, socialization forms. Yeah, go for it. Thank you, Birb.
Yeah, so resource management, to be more specific, to unabstract that term, often we tend to not value the same kinds of everyday activities and items that other people do. So not buying furniture, you said it yourself, like putting your clothes in a pile in the doorway, right? Where someone else,
like that's what I do.
Yeah,
do students.
I do it too. Someone else who's more normative may get quite frustrated with that. Well, we're getting just as frustrated, but instead of being frustrated over that, we're frustrated about how much evil there is in the world and the concept of death and what that means and how many people have died and the massive time behind us and in front of us. And that's what's stressing us out, rather than
the stuff that could make us feel good is stuff like just as abstract, like narratives, ideas. It's funny because you had described earlier about this. What did you call it, Professor? Doctor, the projected identification. Yeah, I do this in a very interesting sense. I did a little short ramble on it, which is I see people as concepts. I can actually, and myself as well. I can emotionally attach myself to concepts over individuals. So like I see like narratives, like characters in a story playing out based on archetypes and things like that, right? Like symbols and archetypes and concepts and ideas. I can emotionally connect to the things a lot more than I can the individual, right? And what's funny is that I myself and others don't perceive that as an adaptation or a negative thing. It's like the default we've had since we can remember. And we can feel joy, we can feel sadness, we can feel the same levels of intimacy probably as we're discovering over time, but they're just in a different sort of dynamic and a different sort of level of thinking, not intelligence based, but just abstraction based. If I can't think of a better way to describe
thinking
it.
About the categories of
the category
rather than their individual instantiations.
Yeah, individual, like the way I describe it, and just so you have it, because people seem to like it, is me and Birb often talk about it like it's almost like a cognition related sort of spectrum, right? And so that old saying, seeing the forest from the trees, or you can't see the forest from the trees, right? The way I envision it is the neurotypical person is walking through the forest. They can see the trees. They're collecting wood to make their home. They're foraging berries to have food. Those are the primary concerns, right? They're looking for things to find a mate, so on. the person that is schizoid or schizotype or cluster A or whatever, the abstract thinker, which often seems to be the case with a lot of schizoids, they're flying overhead with a drone. They're looking at the forest. They're looking at the layout. They're looking at the mountains and the cross range, wondering what's over there across the forest, what's beyond the forest, what's beyond even that. Like they're concerned over like the way the forest exists and not interested at all in.
Can I interject?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, if you see the forest, the individual trees become less interesting in reference to how many potential trees there are. And it's the anxiety of infinite possibility. And this gets back into existential philosophy and Kierkegaard and how schizoids tend to
and that's why a lot of schizoids
stuff.
tend to have issues with existential anxiety and things of that nature, because that's kind of like the default state, it seems to be, for a lot of people. And then in turn, we also describe kind of like, I described like the autistic person as being the person that is inside the tree, studying the cellular structure of the tree, how the tree functions, what creatures live within the tree. And they don't look at what's around the forest. They just want to see inside the tree and everything about the tree, on a molecular level even. So it's interesting. Like we think that some of this these adaptations develop because of a neurodivergence component, and I think that's why oftentimes you see this reference to idiosyncratic thinking, odd beliefs, so on and so forth.
I really want to, excuse me for
interrupting. Yeah, no, go ahead. No, interrupt away. Yeah, this is just.
I want to separate schizotypal from schizoid. First of all, I'm not a fan of the clusters.
Oh, okay. Well, no, for other reasons, I'm not either. Yeah.
The schizotypal typical client is eccentric and odd and paranoid with magical thinking, much closer to psychosis. Now, that doesn't make them a bad person, but it makes them that they have something to deal with. And that's most likely not neurotypical for me, because the schizotypal clients I've had, it wasn't that they were big abstract thinkers, it's that they were really off base in lots of ways.
Off base?
Well, let me see. A woman's crossing the bridge. She's 60 years old. She's in a car. She decides that she has persistent paranoid fantasies. And one of them is that the people, and I'm quoting her now, so this is many, many years ago, and this is the language she used. I believe that the people in the car before me and behind me are white slavers, and they're going to kidnap me. Their aim is to kidnap me and sell me off to somebody for a sex slave. Okay, never happens, but it's a persistent thought. Schizotypal. She is sitting, a very functional person in certain ways and not functional in others. I noticed that dress-wise, she would signal. What do I mean by signaling? She wore designer clothing of a very conservative nature, very high end, but very conservative. And I knew where she got them as well, and that it was a little beyond her own budget. But so there she is, perfectly groomed, except it would be a filthy bra strap held together with a safety pin, or she'd be wearing nylons and there would be a big run in her stocking, and it was every time. So I wanted to find out what was going on, but I didn't want to embarrass or make her uncomfortable. And we did a group exercise. I said, next time when we come to group, I'd like everybody to prepare for this one exercise that I'm going to ask you to be your clothing and discuss what your clothing is signaling for you. Yeah. And it's a self-reflection exercise. And she was capable of doing it. And she said, I'm in here. I'm a dirty little girl sitting in a pile of shit. I need to be rescued. I wear my clothing and I have to give a signal so people will know I'm in here. So I put on the perfect clothing, but then I leave a signal so that people can take the hint and find me. So that.
What's interesting is that makes perfect sense to me. Like, no, like just that the logic or the rationale behind why she would have the bra strap and wear the clothes and the idea that she's trying to convey regarding herself, it's all like in my, I know it might not be a really, but in my mind, that just translates very easily to various symbols pertaining to, what is dirty and how that needs to express, and how the story she's trying to tell via her outfit and the idea. And like, and it's just funny because like if somebody told me that, I would probably just immediately go, yeah, that makes sense to me. I understand why you would do that, but go ahead, Birb. Yeah, sorry.
It made a lot of sense to me as well when I heard it. Like, it didn't seem odd at all. And for me, it was like, oh yeah, so all of that stuff about her life that she's experiencing, that she has memories of, that she's struggling with, that's somehow all getting compressed into one symbol, which is her bra strap. And that's a very largely packed abstraction right there. The fact that it makes perfect sense to her that her whole life story is being conveyed through her bra strap.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me too.
Or through the run in her stocking. And the other paranoid thing that she had was she kept changing dry cleaners. And she'd mention it in therapy. I saw her privately, I saw her in group. And it was very interesting that she was functional enough to be in group, but still conspicuously odd and eccentric. And, she'd have a dream about me poisoning her like a spider in her veins, injecting her. It'd be a little more over the top than my schizoid clients would have. She changed dry cleaners. When I asked her why, she said, because I can see them talking about me in the back. I can't hear what they're saying. I said, well, then how do you know they're talking about you? She says, they always do. And they say the same two things. Either it's this or it's that. And I said, what are the two things? She says, either they say I'm a prostitute or I'm a lesbian. And so every time she would see people in the back of a dry cleaning store talking, she'd assume they were talking about her and that was the content. So most of my schizoid clients do not have that experience. They don't have paranoia.
No,
So I want to separate out that schizotypal, odd, conspicuously eccentric, schizoid traits, lives by herself, has a boyfriend. She was a very attractive woman, even for her age at the time. And now I'm much older than she was then, but still, but so I don't want to lump everything.
No, absolutely. Like I understand not lumping in the, like, this is just my thoughts, but I understand not lumping in the especially the negative or positive symptoms that occur within those individual diagnoses. The only part that I'm interested in, as far as seemingly having a connection, is this concept of the type of thinking that's occurring. Because what I hear, and like I said, I may be wrong, when you describe some of the things like what she said about thinking that they're saying things about her and so on and so forth, what I'm kind of hearing myself is I'm hearing this sort of thinking being expressed in a pathological form, or in a form that is negatively impactful or more potent in its pathology, or in its negative influence on her life and stuff like that. Because it's funny, because like I've had similar thoughts about things, but the main difference is I can kind of differentiate, and it doesn't turn into like that level. So it's kind of like, oh, I have thoughts like that, but I can differentiate, oh, those are just thoughts I'm having. Or I get preoccupied and I start thinking about like concepts and things like that could bother me, or they could become pathological, but they don't, because I'm not at that point in my life in which it could turn into something like that. But I have similar thoughts. And what I'm wondering is it not so much the way, like, I feel like the type of thinking might be, or the cognition aspects of it might be similar, but the pathology and the expression of those things are completely different. And that's kind of like the idea we're trying to figure out, because a lot of schizoids, if you talk to them, if they completely demask and they express everything that's inside their internal worlds and their ideas, but if, let's just say, the difference is, if they actually believed it was real on a material level, then they would be described as having these delusions, these other positive symptoms, these other kind of there's forms of psychosis and things like that. And it's funny because like when I talked to my own psychologist, I told her if I actually believed the things on a material level that I constantly think about and am preoccupied with, would you essentially diagnose me completely different? And she expresses yes. Like if you actually thought they were real,
Yes,
it would be that. But what's interesting is the type of thinking that's occurring, that default sort of thinking, that setting, that cognitive setting, is not, in my belief, a negative adaptation or a form of something that just manifested via trauma or neglect or things of that nature. That's just my theory, my concept. Birb, did you want to say something?
I guess go for it. I can interject there a little bit.
Do it.
So the idea that it's either the same or there's a hard distinction, I don't know. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, considering the relationship between cluster A and schizophrenia genetically, and the fact that we've encountered so many people who have relatives who are schizotypal or schizophrenic.
It's a common occurrence.
And the fact that, lots of schizoids have dipped into psychosis for periods and then dipped out of it again. And my own experiences, it seems to me that these things sort of run on a gradient from an idea that you have to an idea that you believe a little bit stronger, right? And that seems to be the distinction between schizotypal and schizophrenia, is that in schizotypal, there's still this amenability to being suggested out of it. Like, that doesn't make sense. Well, maybe it doesn't make sense. And then full-on psychosis, the belief is so strong that it can't be questioned. And I sort of see it as this gradient that runs across rather than these hard categories that have nothing to do with each other.
Because right? I've also experienced, I guess what would be called a psychotic break in my life. I hit a point where the pressure, the sense of loneliness, the depression, all the things that come with a lot of the PD, or feeling so incongruent with the world around me in every capacity, my inability to connect to others because of the incongruence of how I express and how I feel about things, that I hit a break at one point where I had maybe like a week or two. It was like 2 weeks in which I was way lower functioning, and I couldn't. It wasn't just constant panic attacks. It was constant panic attacks over beliefs that were I could. There was like a cognitive dissonance there because I knew the beliefs were irrational, and they became more and more absurd, but the fear would not subside.
So you said something that's very interesting and thought-provoking, both of you, to me, which is the emphasis on the abstract. And I want to play around with it a little as a concept.
Yeah, let's have fun.
Not necessarily right about it, but I had really thought about it from this point of view. And then I had some questions about it, which was, there's a lot of alternate world building in my clients, and that I can recognize. And that's a form of abstraction. When you talked about the focus on the political situation as a whole, now I have a question here. I have some clients, and I'm not a big fan of comorbidity, but there is a type of person that I'm calling a Narzoid. It's not a real diagnosis. You're not going to find it in the books, but I've been doing this a long time, and I'll see somebody that will have some narcissistic coping mechanisms like devaluation of other people or things like that.
Oh yeah.
But they'll be living a zoid life.
Yeah, absolutely. That is I see that constantly.
Okay, so I'm calling that Narzoid, narcissistic coping mechanisms, but really if I look at what the person's doing, how they relate to the world, aside from that maybe a malignant piece. Now, in many of these cases, because I work with dreams and I work with what's inside a person and what's projected outward, they are projecting outward their inner dilemma. So when they see the world is going to blow up, and some people have used those words, or be destroyed, they're really usually at a point inside that when they start talking to me about it, it seems like they're talking about their own identity, their own sense of their future for themselves, but it's being externalized and they're not aware they're externalizing it onto the world. That's an interpretation I'm making for them to play with. They can decide after I offer it whether it fits, it doesn't fit. I'm not inside.
No, yeah.
But so this preoccupation, like right now, I have clients who are preoccupied with, they'll give money to political causes to save the world that they can't afford, perhaps, or something like that.
Yeah.
Because the cause is really very, very important to them because it symbolizes their inner struggle of good and evil, survival versus not surviving. Now, is that something that
actually, yeah.
Can I answer?
Yeah,
Can I
go
answer?
ahead. Go ahead. Verb is excited now.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, I'm excited because this is my favorite topic. So yeah, that actually is a pretty good example in the sense that often being schizoid means that there are a lot of really important needs in your material, concrete environment that aren't being met. Such as physical affection and just eating well enough and drinking enough water. Like there's a lot of not caring about yourself because there isn't a community around you to sort of co-regulate with. And like, okay, now we're eating and now we're sleeping and now we're doing these things. It's like the isolation sort of causes this withering in some people. And then the stress, which is caused by those needs not being met, it's not so likely that they'll often know why they're uncomfortable, right? And so often the discomfort that they're feeling will be projected into the abstract domain, right? So they'll be uncomfortable about something very concrete, and then the explanation will be like, there's something really wrong with the way the world is.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, but because the zone that they work within in our thought, like is so that's the realm in which they default to, that they could kind of explain things and actually attach themselves to more easily. That's why there's a difficulty in trying to express that in a more concrete fashion.
I want to tie this back to something that's really important that we just talked about, which is the idiosyncratic thinking, which borders into the delusional. And I think that there's a connection between the abstraction and the delusion in the sense that if you're a sensitive person who's a very abstract thinker, the amount of material that you have to work with in terms of explaining what's going on around you is vast, in the sense that you're thinking about illnesses that are very rare in countries you've never been to. You're thinking about wars that are taking place in countries you've never been to. You're thinking about forces that, mental illnesses that happen, because your perception is very broad.
They can go into the metaphysical, the spiritual, the religious.
That as well, right? Yeah, exactly as well. So, what God wants for me and all these things. But just because your perception is so broad, you have all this material to work with. And then when the stress really hits, right? Because these ideas are floating around, just the possibility of connecting one of those abstract ideas to something in the concrete domain becomes much more possible. And so suddenly, whereas you were just thinking about the possibility of deific forces and devils and gods and what that all means in a way that we wouldn't think was so pathological, when the stress hits, because that's floating around, then and you put stress in the nervous system, pathological. It connects to those things. And now suddenly what's really wrong in my environment, what's literally material wrong, is that a God is not happy with me. Right. And I really think there's a connection between the abstract thinking and stress and pseudo delusional states.
And you mentioned Dr. Greenberg too, is the Narzoid or the Histrionic zoid, right? What's funny too is that the expression of a different diagnosis or a comorbidity or whatever you want to call it is very abstract within the realm of the schizoid, in the sense that, like, yes, if you have somebody that's a narzoid, Narzoid or Narzoid.
When I grew up, narc was a narc.
Yeah, their narcissism might translate into stuff that is very like grandiose, or it become almost metaphysical or bigger scale. Like my thinking is different, and so I am like this, and other human beings,
other
don't
people
understand.
Are beneath me.
Other people, and so that's obviously a way to cope with the fact that I am lonely. I can't connect to anyone. I can't communicate myself with anybody. I feel completely separate from my species in so many regards, and so I'm going to just devalue everything in order to kind of deal with that. And what's funny is that a lot of schizoids I've talked to, they do the opposite. They become self-pessimistic, so they devalue themselves to the point where they it's their fault that they can't function within the regular world.
Well, that's me as well. That's me, because for me, it's like, it's just as abstract, but it's pessimistic instead of optimistic, in the sense that, okay, there's all of this world, this existential world that's flashing through my head very rapidly and disturbingly, and it's so big and I'm so powerless in reference to it, right, that no step I could take could possibly work, right? I'm just barraged by the bigness of it. And so that's why I think that the abstraction is the consistent piece, and then different levels of grandiosity and vulnerability play across the unique,
or even BPD. I've talked to schizoids that are diagnosed with both a BPD and schizoid, because they can't connect to people, but if they manage to, then some of those BPD sort of expressions can occur. And sometimes they could actually, what's interesting too is that one of the things that schizoids are said to be prone to is erotomania. And so they'll be like, they could be a schizoid that displays BPD via their erotomania.
Well, if by erotomania you mean to be preoccupied with somebody as a partner who doesn't want them as a partner,
that doesn't even know they exist. Or even
like a celebrity,
a celebrity, or a YouTube personality,
Yeah.
or something, and they develop a conceptual relationship with this person that it feels real to them, and so on, and they could actually develop. They can almost display BP sort of symptoms or criteria, but based on that. So if the YouTuber or the celebrity or the person does something that makes them feel less connected to them, they could actually have an outward, or inside they'll have a response to it that is very borderline.
And well, that's in line with the distance.
Borderline in being extreme and emotional.
Yeah. Yes. So they might, like I would be in a situation where, well, this isn't BPD, but like, let's just say I'd be at home and I would just be fine. And then I would be, reading history and looking at some news and stuff. And I would see something that just gave me some awful sense of righteous indignation. Right. And I would get like, it was funny because at the same time, there'd be like, I don't know, something horrible is happening within my family, or something terrible is probably happening in my actual life that somebody else would consider terrible. And that's all sliding off of me. But I get preoccupied with this like thing, and then I get so angry. I start punching the wall, and I get so mad. Like the way
it's not about anybody specific.
No, I'm just mad about the concept, the idea, the narrative that's playing out in the external world around me. Like, why does it have to be this way? Why must it be like this? And I get so upset, so visibly upset. I'm by myself.
I think we're getting into a ramble alert here.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so let me go on a little bit about two things. And one is I'm spiritually inclined. I didn't think I would end up spiritually inclined. It's as big a surprise to me as it would be to anyone in my family. But when I go to, I also teach at tarot conferences, believe it or not, because I was approached by tarot readers that they get people who with personality disorders who come to them and they really do not feel equipped sometimes to deal with it. And I also speak tarot as a fluent language. I speak Rider-Waite-Smith and a few other tarot languages. And so I would present. And what I found in the mystical groups that I belong to, or in the tarot world, you get people who find this. I'm a Kabbalist as well. So in Kabbalah, we're flesh made, spirit made flesh, incarnated here. But there's different worlds. And the world of the imagination would be in Yesod, and would be the foundation before. And so I get a lot of people that don't do well on the earth plane, and they go one up. They find it much easier to be in yoga and meditative states and things like that. And they can be isolated.
Or on psychedelics.
Psychedelics. I did a lot of psychedelics when I was young. Really a lot. And my cousin wrote the book on it. Was the first person to go to jail for LSD in America. Yeah. So, when I was young, a lot of psychedelics. But I was going to ask you, when you were having your brief psychotic break, whether anything like that, whether you're on drugs or anything precipitated.
No, zero drugs. I drink on occasion, like on weekends. I don't smoke. I don't even smoke marijuana. Like, I don't do any drugs. And it's funny. The reason I don't do drugs isn't because, they're bad, they're wrong. I have no problem with them. It's just that since I was in high school, I always thought my thinking's off and strange, and I feel like I'm insane compared to other people. So I was always afraid of what something like that would do to me. Because I was had the self-pessimism growing up of I'm insane, because everyone makes me feel like as I am, because every time I express something that's odd, they say I'm crazy. They think I'm strange. And so that actually kept me away from any kind of drugs, because I was like, oh, but what if they're right? What if I am insane? Oh no, I can't do drugs, because what if something crazy happens to me? And so then I stayed away from them my whole life.
Well, some people don't do well on them, and some people do. And there is that some people do become schizophrenic who had a genetic predisposition who might not have become schizophrenic elsewhere. There's data on that. So they warn people, don't do marijuana if you have it in your family or things. But so the two things that I wanted to go into was the spiritual realm, where, because you mentioned birb about gods and things like that, and you mentioned, I think, that taking it to another realm where these forces are, where you experience forces, and you don't sound crazy because you're with other people who are spiritually inclined. Like if you talk to a group of people who are all studying Kabbalah and esoteric tarot in the Western mystery tradition, these ideas have literal currency and are taken very seriously, and nobody thinks you crazy. But if you talk about those type of ideas that are spiritually accepted, depending upon which group you're in, as a fact, it's something you can experience, and it's not considered abnormal to experience it. They have views about the experience and how you should use it or what have you. Then, so I meet many, many more people who have made a schizoid adaptation in those groups than I meet outside those groups. So
there's a reason.
Whoa. Yeah, that is
there's a very good,
right
what's really funny too is that Axtar's, I think it was Axtar's profile, it even mentions as a common trait within schizoids is an interest in the esoteric and the occult. It's a common thing. It's or just not necessarily the occult. The occult's pretty common, but the esoteric specifically, whether it's esoteric philosophy, theology, or other types of things. That's a very common thing amongst.
I want to add something to that little observation, which is so useful, which is that there's all these schizoids in these groups. So that might not even be truly representing the breadth of the scenario, the breadth of the distribution, because something that's quite common in hyper abstraction is these individual cultures which practice these esoteric traditions, right? These are like concrete activities that are cultural and ingrained, and people find their way into them, and then they practice them because other people are practicing them, right? And somebody with a predisposition towards this kind of thought, of course, will veer in that direction faster. But another thing that happens is that people abstract out of those boxes and compare them. And you get to a place where, okay, there's this tradition and these gods and these gods, right? And they're all nested in relation to each other. And which one is true? All of them? None of them? And so these people become isolated. They're very spiritual, but they become isolated even from spiritual communities because they're so abstract.
Well, because it gets to a point where you take part, let's just say if it's an esoteric interest, right? And then you take part in it, and then you start questioning and abstracting out and unpacking all the stuff within that group. The people within that group that aren't like necessarily neurodivergent, they're going to be like, what is this person doing? Why are they unpacking everything? Why are they taking everything apart? Why are they doing this? And there's no malicious intent. It's just the brain just goes there. It just constantly goes there. And then you become isolated. Then they start, you turn into not a pariah, but you become alienated within even those groups of people. And because it's my argument, it's our argument too, that there is in fact some kind of cognitive situation. And what's funny is that when you get people that are schizoid together, then they start being able to, none of them are concerned with some of these preoccupations. So they can talk about their own beliefs or thoughts in these kind of really open ways. They can construct, deconstruct, and so on. And no one's getting, flustered about it at all. And so
what ends up happening is rather than being strictly within one of these traditions and following the rules, right? It's way more open-ended. And so people will be bringing in ideas from all of these different places and mixing and matching them and talking about them. And the conversation will loosely associate all over the place, right? Until it's like
bananas.
It's bizarre. It's
but we
bananas,
love it.
Right?
We love it.
But we just, yeah.
If you want to see it in action, I belong to Builders of the Adytum, which is a Western Mystery School tradition, BOTA.org. And in various places in the United States, it's a solitary pursuit. There's 15 years, really there's 30 years, if you do them the way that I'm doing it takes me forever, of lessons that you get for very little money in the mail, and that you pursue your spiritual development on your own. But then there are these free open study groups that anybody can come to. You don't have to be a member. And what happens in the study group, the one in New York, which is held in the Masonic Lodge on 23rd Street, I think on the third or fourth Saturday, you can check. Now they're meeting on Zoom, so you can get onto these things. It's fascinating because they will be taking as a focus something from the BOTA work, which will be esoteric tarot, transformational alchemy, Kabbalah, the tree of life diagram, the Hebrew letters, gematria. I mean, a whole melange of things that are very, very out there, all put together. And then you'll get people come to the study group because they heard it was a meetup or something. And like one person will have a really strong interest in the history of the Templars. And they'll see everything through the lens of the Templars. And then someone else will come with Egyptian religion. And everybody's contributing to the study group. We're doing it on the High Priestess and the letter Gimel, which means camel and the connection between the past and the present, the conscious and the subconscious, etc., and all kinds of symbolism. And then you'll have people with their private preoccupations on the doorway that got them into their particular type of symbolism that they feel most drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
And so it will become one of those conversations, but nobody's left out. There isn't that, unless they insist that you believe in their symbolism, which people don't.
Yeah.
They're the ideas. Now, I had one other thing that I wanted to talk about, which hadn't been mentioned. My clients split, and all the clients with personality disorders have split views. And my clients generally have split from their body and have split their intellect from their emotions, which isn't something that we've talked about.
No, yeah.
And so because half of what we've talked about has to do with once you already are in a schizoid state, let's say, with a schizoid view of the world and schizoid preoccupations, how do you live in the world as it is? How do you adapt and have it what for you is a meaningful, happy life, or what for me would be a meaningful, happy life if I'm in this situation? However, and that's different than what gives rise to it. Like lots of things could give rise to it, but then you have it and it becomes, well, do I have a meaningful, happy life by going into, which usually is, how do I get sufficient safe contact without feeling intruded upon or having my exit stolen or
absolutely,
things like that. So we're talking about kind of a little bit separate. A lot of the intellectual abstractions from my clients, and I don't know, you might be getting me thinking a little broader, so it might be different than I've been thinking, is that they've detached from their body so much that they're basically thinking heads. And so
floating brains, I've heard that many times.
One woman's dream that I did chapter 13 in my book. Boy,
there it is. Show it. There it is. Yeah. A lot of people already are very well.
In chapter 13, I have a collection of 40 years worth of dreams from my schizoid clients, which I organized in relation to how the dream relates to their current receptivity towards contact and what form of contact, or whether it's impossible for them and so forth, or just frustrating. And one woman's dream, which I'll never forget, is she was a very well made up head. She had perfect makeup on, her hair was done, and she was going down the subway, but she had zero body in the dream. And her head was just bouncing down one step to the other, bouncing all the way, getting into the subway.
Dreams like that.
And what she remarked on it is nobody noticed that I seemed to be missing a body. Nobody thought this was strange. They don't know that all I am is a head. So that was her take. So do you relate any of that to yourself?
No, I do.
Yeah, we relate to all of that.
Yeah, all of that. That's what's really funny, like every single aspect of it.
From my point of view, there's lots of places that are more accepting than generic culture and of odd ideas and of people who were more different. And it's a matter of finding them. Like, I really didn't feel good. Sometimes it's even in the decade. I think we're in a nice schizoid decade now.
Well, the internet helps a lot.
The internet, everything is pro-schizoid right now, except there's some people that are really having some problems because they won't be. Have you been following what's going on in Japan with the Hikikomori? I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The hermits.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
the herbivore men.
I am getting that now occasionally here because of COVID, people living with their family in the back room, and they would have made 20 years ago an adaptation of some form that allowed them to work because people were thrown more. They had to make adaptations before everybody had a computer, or you were conspicuously unable to make any form of an adaptation. But a lot of my clients did make. My pre-internet clients found ways to adapt and get partial relationships. Now it's a schizoid thing, but that, you know, it's pro-schizoid in the sense that we can turn off things. We can turn off people. We don't have to meet them in person. Mm-hmm. You can record this, edit out anything you don't like about me. you see what I mean? The power.
Yeah. We wouldn't do that. We were not just gonna.
We're not gonna. Yeah.
We didn't like what she said. Let's get rid of that.
Let's perfectly clip her sentences so that she only says things that seem like they agree with us.
Yeah, we're not
right. But people like, for example, I'm not schizoid, but I can relate to a lot of the stuff because of the culture. It feels. If I call somebody, it feels like intrusive now. It used to be the only way that you could reach somebody was by phoning them. Now there's various levels where it feels like text to me is least intrusive. Email seems.
Yeah, some people would say that getting a phone call is intrusive now. Yes.
Yeah.
I think I was, yeah.
So
Sorry.
The culture has gone to favor more things that make it easier for some of my schizoid clients, but it also has made it harder because there is not a need to practice and find on my clients' end, how do they fit in? They're doing their work online. Mm-hmm. They're having their friendships online. They're having sex online, except for when they're in the BDSM club or something. And, you know, Sex in the Single Schizoid is another show.
Mm-hmm.
We can do that show.
Yeah, we can do that show another time if you're ever interested. We can do multiple shows. This is really fun.
So you know, there is, I have some concern, and I want to, part of my concern is that people, you found out about schizoid and the people who zoids who have been attracted to the show or who are looking for community, safe community that they can, as you pointed out, they can come on and off, they can come in and out. It is happening now. And it's an interesting time that way because I think that like the 40s and the 50s, I felt, I'm born in 1945. I had to wait it out. There was nothing that I could relate to for about 15 years until the mid 60s. And then I was a hippie and then I could relate to everything that went there. And then the culture changes again and it becomes easier or harder to relate given whatever your own adaptation is or eccentricities and things like that. It was a very nice borderline culture in the mid 60s. I could relate much better.
Everyone loves everyone.
Yeah. You know, love, no standards, free sex, you know, no, around impulsivity and things like that. And then we shifted out of that into a narcissistic culture in the 70s, you know, the 80s. And, you know, everybody had to be special and suddenly everyone's preoccupied with their jobs. And then we went into schizoid with the internet. So I think we're in a schizoid period right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually kind of agree with that sense. I think I have to agree because this is the first time, from what I understand, this community I'm creating is the only one in history That is knowingly schizoid, like where, because there's no, I've tried. That's the reason I created this, is because there wasn't one in existence. I couldn't find one, and the ones that did exist were abandoned or just not used in a major capacity, like Facebook groups and stuff like that. It just, there was a community there for like everyone, but not for this, and there was very specific reasons for that. But I think that because even Birb, when they asked like how can you become more congruent with your kind of concrete environment in a way that can make your life more functional, and you displayed a concern about people become so, like the Hikikomoris, becoming so preoccupied with internet connection that they lose a sense of the concrete. That's kind of what I try to avoid too. When I talk this stuff on the channel and even on the Discord, I don't pressure anyone to, go out of their way to become uncomfortable, to like say try and attempt to socialize or do this or do that, right? But I do discuss the ideas of how important it is or how it's valuable to think about some of those concrete things. I even did a video a while back where I talked about like working out. Like you should work out, and I understand why it feels worthless and useless in this vast way, but like if your body feels better, you can think better, and if you can think better, you might be able to get a little less like negative symptoms, where they might bog you down a little less, so that you can actually get some things done and things like that. Like, so I do like kind of promoting this idea of trying to step outside of the internet, but I would never push it, because the moment you push it is the moment everyone withdraws. And because like a lot of people wouldn't be functioning enough to do what I do with my life, talk to people every day, do sales, do this, to be on YouTube, so on and so forth.
I want people to become more aware of schizoid adaptations and more accepting, and not to confuse them with schizophrenia. And it's a real problem right now, which is one of the reasons I came on here, is I do agree that
Thank you, by the way.
You have this great experiment going that I hadn't heard of before. It was almost an oxymoron. You had a group of schizoids.
Trust me, you should have talked to me like 7 months ago. I would have never imagined. I feel like a different person after this. It's really odd. I'm going through my own troubles, just adjusting to the fact that I'm connecting to other human beings in any capacity. That was quite a transition over the last few months. It's been a difficult one, but anyway, go ahead.
So one of the concerns that I have is that people don't know what schizoid. People have heard of narcissism. People have heard of borderline by now. If they're in a certain world, I don't mean everyone has, but quite a few people are familiar with that, either through political situations or through, every 20 years a new diagnosis comes into popularity.
It shows up on Time magazine.
But people don't really understand or know what schizoid is. And I said to you off screen that when my book, I published it myself. By the way, this is the symbol I used for schizoid. Borderline, heart, love's going to solve all my problems. Here, getting the admiration and status from the narcissist is going to solve all my problems. I'll just be more special. I'll be the best. And here, I need to be able to take care of myself. I need to protect my heart. It's in this part of the key. And I need to be able to lock the door when I want to keep other people out. So this was the thing. And I put it in the title, Borderline Narcissist and Schizoid, even though I hadn't written that much on schizoid. I don't have an equal number of chapters on it. I put a lot in chapter 3. I just wanted the word there. I wanted the people and I wanted to define it. So then the book I had a big article on narcissism and then Zoid magazine. I didn't even know what it was, magazine. It's a big deal. And I immediately got offers for my book to put it into German. I sold it to a division of Random House Kösel, lovely, lovely people, but they told me I had to leave out schizoid from the title. So it's Borderline und Narzissmus by Kösel, division of Random House.
But it's in there. The chapters are in there.
The chapters are in there. And I had to cut some other chapters out. But you see,
it's just so funny because it's like the fact that we got erased.
It's so zoid. You're so isolated that
we can't even be on book covers.
And so it's a very strange thing, because I had to make sure that they would include the chapters. And I have other people who have offered to buy the book, but usually isn't whatever. But so there's a real need to educate people. You can't be accepted if people don't understand what's going on, that it's a variation, that you're not going to do anything awful. People have all sorts of, even the people who first identify with themselves, something odd is going on. Sometimes I get self-referred people who are schizoid who think that they're young men, so they have violent sexual thoughts and perverse fantasies like everyone else sometimes. And so they tell me that they come in and they tell me they're a psychopath or that they're a malignant.
That was me. I did that. Yeah. No, I didn't have any violent fantasies, but I thought I was a psychopath just because I wasn't having feeling, like I wasn't, feeling.
That's what I thought
people.
about myself before when I was younger. I thought I must be some like sociopath / psychopath / crazy person that feels nothing and all this stuff. And it wasn't that I felt nothing. I just didn't feel anything for the things that I was expected to feel things about. And I felt a lot for the things that nobody seemed to care about. So anyway.
So I think that you're doing a really good deed. And I really want to support your community if you find my work useful.
No, very, very useful.
And I think from my point of view, at least, that I have things to learn from you guys, and I'm wondering about gender differences, because the guys I know who are schizoid, they're much more interested in the existential philosophers than the women. The women aren't talking about the existential philosophers. One woman was talking about living in the 18th century mostly, and in her fantasies, and not necessarily being herself. And other people were talking about not everyone is so intellectual who becomes schizoid.
The point about the male schizoids being more interested in the existential philosophers actually makes a lot of sense, because men tend to read a lot more nonfiction on average, right? So if you compare existential philosophy, which is nonfiction, as nonfiction as you can get, essentially, right? And you compare that to the kinds of interests with which more stereotypically feminine schizoids are interested in. It's existential philosophy on one end, and then it's archetype and narrative and mythical stories of
metaphor,
deific love. And it's not so much that the women are any less abstract. It's just that along the gradients of interest, right? The male schizoids veer towards the existential philosophers, and the female schizoids might veer more towards Jung or something like that, if that makes any sense.
Well, if I go to a tarot conference, about a quarter of the people are likely to be, at the very least, schizoid-like. We'll put it that way. I don't know them well enough to diagnose them, but they're living what they're meeting through the cards and through the symbols on the cards. So, and by the way,
they make more sense.
So we meet through doing the readings for each other, which is akin to doing the book. Someone presenting me with a book and saying, I'm on page 193, there's a good description of what I feel. And if we do cards and we can say, well, the Two of Swords really represents myself right now. So I sometimes will introduce tarot into my psychotherapy world so that we can talk through the language of tarot and archetypes. And that is
that's so cool. It's so cool.
And I can do both of your birth cards if you like, or it's on the tarot.
yes.
Tarotpool.com.
It's just so funny. I didn't think we were gonna get mentioned tarot on this stream. On this recording. It's so great.
We've got tarot, we've got Kabbalah, we've got a lot of abstract systems that I'm particularly interested in, and that so I'm saying that one part that people may not think of, and if you're a schizoid male and you're interested, and you're interested in if you have schizoid heterosexual male by any chance, and you want to meet a lot of women who might be very accepting of whatever, a tarot conference is good. It's kind of
you heard it there, boys.
Switch off the Kierkegaard.
Go to tarot.
You can talk in the world of tarot. You're going to meet some really great gay guys if you're gay, and then you're going to meet. There's going to be a few heterosexual bulls in that herd, and the rest of them, the rest of them,
dating convention, the tarot and esoteric Kabbalah conventions.
All the Kierkegaard fanboys are going to get laid off of this podcast.
You can come wearing anything you like. One guy showed up in a kilt and, whatever, a lot of trans and things like that.
Yeah, and there's going to be more people there that are going to be like, that kilt looks so sexy. I like that person's kilt.
Or whatever you want. Somebody came in a skirt, who cares? And everybody is like, it's like half a thing. It's sort of like a Comic-Con that I've never been to. You know what I mean? But it has an element of, there's room for a lot of different things. And since you get to choose your own deck. There's hundreds and hundreds of deck designs. So there's a lot of personal choice for personal expression. And there's a lot of Schizoid tarot readers. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in those worlds. So that is something
that's funny because I dabble in tarot too and all that. So
did you?
I'm at like prior to this channel, I made an attempt at a channel in which I did readings of ancient grimoires and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, like I was into I've always been into that stuff. It's just, it's one of the things that made me go Schizoid alert. Like when I started reading more and more about it, was like, what specifically esoteric and occult interests are common? I'm like, okay, this is hitting it on the mark.
So so you already know that world, and there's a lot of people in it who are more accepting. The people who tend to go to tarot conferences tend to be very accepting of whatever eccentricities people have. They're pretty eccentric themselves, and there's a kind of fun playing through the abstract. You can meet people through the abstract. Like there was one woman, this was many years ago, The Sopranos was on, and we decided to do a soprano. What would the Sopranos tarot look like? Like who's the Hierophant, who is the magician?
God. We do that kind of stuff all the time in different not in tarot necessarily, but like we'll often do that to each other. Like when some of my, I guess, Schizoid comrades on the server, like we'll think of a video game or a book or something, and then we'll start thinking like who would fit into this category and this archetype, and then we can discuss that for like an hour. Even me, Birb, have done it. Huh, Birb? Like we start fitting people into like archetypes and symbols and like who matches up with who and which one makes more sense, and we'll have arguments about it. And
I'm remembering the what was it, something about autism and Pokemon? We were like,
oh yeah. Yeah, we were trying to think of like we were thinking of Pokemon that would fall in line with like personality disorder types and like things like that.
What are their strengths and weaknesses?
Strengths and weaknesses, and why lightning? Why fire? Why grass? Why does water make sense as a symbol in association to this sort of behavior, and why they would be that Pokemon and what they would look like? It's just we would have these insane sort of sounding conversations like that of that type. So,
well, if that interests you, I'll give them a commercial because I spent 5 years.
Go for it. Chill away.
Tarot I'm a psychology consultant to the Tarot School of New York. And the directors do a salon online on a tarot card, and it's very heavily intellectualized in some cases and abstracted. And the one they're doing this coming Monday, Wald Amberstone of the Tarot School and his wife Ruth Ann, but Wald will be doing the lecture on it, is a very abstracted, all the cards you may already know from the mystery school things have very elaborate secret names. And he's doing the one for death card for transformation. And they usually start with child of the something, from the Golden Dawn tradition, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and the poet Yeats was a member. So they'll be doing every Monday evening, Eastern Standard Time. You can go to tarotschool.com, look for the Tarot Salon. It's $20, and you get to both play with the cards and hear in a very sophisticated, very abstract in many ways, too abstract for some people, and down to earth on the cards from Wald Amberstone.
That's so funny because I always wondered, and like you just brought something together that I never thought about, which is like I've always been told, like when I did do tarot readings for people, they would be like, oh, you know what you're doing. I used to do oracle readings too, right? Like oracles. Okay. Yeah. And they'd be like, wow, you're hitting it on the money, or wow, these are really good, like blah, blah, blah. And then you started saying like there's a lot of tarot readers or schizoid. I'm like, that makes sense that tarot readers would have this kind of thinking, this idiosyncratic thinking, because the symbol-based abstract sort of thinking, because it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense why they would be good at tarot. because they can see a picture and see a million things in the picture. And then they're like, they don't just see the picture. Oh, it's a moon. Right. Like they would see.
Tell me, if you don't mind, if it's not too personal, can you tell me what deck you used to read with?
Oh, I still do on occasion, but I have this affinity for crows. So I actually bought this really nice crow deck. I've tried Rider, I've tried like different ones, and I can use them, but like I could never kind of emotionally connect to them, if that makes any sense. And but when I got this crow deck, I've always had this affinity toward the crow as a symbol and a figure, and so on and so forth. And it's actually just it's a regular deck, it's a Rider deck, but it has all the crow symbolism mixed into it. And it also has additional, what do you call them? Specific, I can't remember the phrase, like a card you set aside to set the theme of the reading.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about, though, right?
The core cards are you talking about, or are you
no, it's like actual special cards that came with this deck that you decide what type of reading it's going to be, or what feelings or ideas you're trying to focus on. Like, is it about what interpersonal relationships? Is it about more abstract ideas? And so then you have that card out and available face up while you're doing the reading. There's a word for it, but I can't remember.
Signifier, or
there you go. Signifier.
Yeah, because I don't usually use that, but I usually use the first card. Like in the Tarot School hates the Celtic Cross because they got really tired of it. It's not specific enough. You can make up your own. See, one of the nice things is there's a lot of room in tarot where you personalize it and do it your own way. It's totally, so I'm saying that there already exists a world and a group of people in that world who I think that some of your listeners might be comfortable, and the ones that don't want to just talk existential philosophy or something, or politics. There's this other iconic world where there's room for your self-expression through which deck you choose. You can design your own deck. Tarotland got very interested a few years back in the Lenormand Oracle, because we all knew tarots. A lot of us, I'm certified as a professional tarot reader and pretty much a master, not a grandmaster. Gold would be a grandmaster, Ruth Ann.
Awesome.
This was drawn by Robert Place.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, your cover is very. I was gonna say that earlier before you even mentioned the tarot stuff. I was like, there's something very tarot about that to me. That's so
right.
Tarot.
This is great Robert Place, who's an expert on alchemy and the history of tarot, not the made-up history of tarot. Do you know what I mean? But the real Renaissance Italy type of thing. And I'll give him a commercial because he's done many, many decks, and he's a fabulous artist, jewelry maker, and alchemist.
We do have to end here because it's hit that mark, but I want to be really transparent about something, and that's that I expected a certain interview and conversation about the certain topics and go, and then, but honestly, me and including Burr, we thought, like if it gets too abstract, maybe it won't be good, or maybe we'll lose the point of this, or like maybe Dr. Greenberg would be like, oh no, I don't do that, or I don't think about that stuff, or blah blah blah, because we didn't know, like we didn't really understand. But just hearing, I was just thinking like, like I was preoccupied and concerned with the possibility that like, oh, we're dealing with possibly like a more we're dealing with a more neurotypical professional that might not like be okay with us talking about these like weird, going different places and stuff like that. And just the fact that you started mentioning all that stuff is really just awesome. Like I was just like, oh, okay, wow, I didn't give you enough credit at all, like at all. And I'll be honest, I'm slightly ashamed I didn't. I am, and I'm really glad. Otherwise happened.
Most people don't expect me to show up when they do the reading stuff. They picture this little, they're really disappointed when they see me sometimes, because there I am, like it's like a bit like being a schizoid adaptation is they imagine who they imagine from. I'm very logical, so there's my writing. I deconstruct things and put it into common language and so forth. And they picture this very sweet old lady with a gray bun with a big skirt, and who's going to listen very seriously, not
projected identification. Actually,
not Dr. Greenberg, who studied to be a belly dancer and who's an expert in tarot on the side, who you know what I mean, who's very open and weird.
Yeah, I built a character in my mind,
yeah.
And I started assuming that the character I built was real and true. And that in itself is almost a form of minor delusion. And you have dispelled that delusion.
Oh, well, I'm glad. So we can play together then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, give me some credit on this one. I was telling you we should.
No, good job. No, Birb called it. Birb called it. I was the one that was more hesitant. Birb was like, no, let's go, balls out. And then and I'm like, I don't know. I was the one that was kind of a little more reserved about it. And I'm really glad I listened and went with it. But by the way, if you want to mention anything about yourself or your websites or anything else, go for it. This is like the time for it.
Okay, well, I'm a psychologist. I'm a member of the New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy. And that's equivalent to being a faculty member. I'm on the faculty of the Gestalt Center for Psychotherapy and Training in New York. And I teach this internationally, and I consult on all of this stuff, and I have a private practice going. I put out a lot of free material because I think it's really important. Not everybody can get to a therapist.
Quora is very useful. You use it a lot. A lot of people read it.
So I have over 2,500 answers to questions on things on Quora, and more I'm trying to bring in zoid stuff because people are over defining people as narcissists when they're really zoid, and the reasons, the zoid reasons why they left and why they come back and so forth. I also write an article a month usually for Psychology Today. And that's a free blog called Understanding Narcissism. But I did it with the understanding that though I would write a lot on narcissism, because when I started, it was a very hot topic, but I could write on the other ones. So I started adding things about more zoid stuff. Is your narcissistic mate really schizoid, for example, and giving examples where two people do the same thing, say the same thing, but they do it for very different reasons. So you can find free information on Psychology Today. I have 71 articles up there now, mostly on narcissism, some on self-help for narcissism, if any narcissists ever listen to your show. I wrote the first, what I think are self-help articles. And by the way, when you go to the Tarot School website, I have articles I wrote on tarot projective methods in psychotherapy that many
sounds
years
fun.
ago, that if you go under articles, you can find Elinor Greenberg. So more free stuff. I'm doing as many interviews as I can with people who I think will find me congenial, because not everybody, I don't want white bread either, in a sense, if you know what I mean. I'm not generic. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and I want to be on shows with people I'm comfortable with. I'm more comfortable with you guys than a lot.
Are you? That's what I was going to ask. Are you comfortable with us? Yeah. Like, is this pretty comfortable? Or are you going to leave and say, I'm never being on this thing ever again? I'm not talking to this guy ever again. This was awful.
No, this is like, comfortable for me, and I learned something from your end. I get a fresh perspective, because it can get stale thinking in my own head, because not everybody shares my interest in schizoid personality disorder, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no. I know exactly what you mean.
I have a set of interests.
Literally know what you mean every way.
I'm the person that studied lepers by themselves as a child because I saw the movie The Robe. So yes, this is comfortable to me. The really, straight psychoanalytic, 1950s world of the therapist interprets and we don't share is not very interesting to me.
That would be another interesting subject I'd like to hear more about in the future from you, would be your critiques and criticism of psychotherapy today in the past, and where they went wrong, where they went right. Like I'd actually be very curious to what you thought about that. Not now, obviously we got to wrap it up.
You know, I'd like to come on and do birth cards and do elemental
yeah, whatever.
And talk about, you know, what deck represents your worldview. If you don't have a deck that represents your worldview, make a deck that represents your worldview. I had people making their own oracle decks at one of the presentations I did. I came with cards, blanks that they could then fill in. And, you know, because not every, so that you don't have to be generic. That's my message. There's no requirement really in the universe that all of us be alike. So what you were saying about where is there room for you? Where will there be acceptance? There are worlds.
There are worlds. That's actually a very nice thing to hear. And but and just a thing about real quick I wanted to mention is that for those of you that hear tarot and go, oh no, I don't like that stuff, just remember a lot of tarot users, and I'm one of them, don't really believe in some of the I guess some of the more magical capacities or ideas behind that some people do believe in pertaining to it. Mine are more like, I think there's like an existential language in the universe that has to do with like symbols and imagery and archetypes, because that's how I think. And so even if you don't think there's some magic coming out of them or anything like that, just having a language to speak in that is symbolic in nature makes it really easy for someone like myself to really understand what's happening in my life and what's going on and things around me. But anyway, Birb, any last words before?
Magic is okay, but optional.
Magic is okay, but optional. for tarot, you don't have to believe in magic. Okay,
you don't, and you know, and if you want to be a ceremonial magician, that's fine too.
Whatever you want.
For that too. There's room for a lot of stuff in the universe, and why not?
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Greenberg. Anybody that listened to this the whole way, thank you for that. That's awesome. If you want to support this channel, if you want to support the streams and everything else associated, the project, the server, please support me on the Patreon. Also, you know, PayPal, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You know the show. And that way I can continue doing this and spend more time doing this and talking to wonderful people like Dr. Greenberg. So thank you and goodbye.